Hello all, I'm sure many of you have seen this news that the University of Leicester has done a report stating the countryside is overwhelmingly white and needs more halal food too, apparently. Now, I understand that these things can be incredibly frustrating, and I don't want to add to the chorus of rage bait because I believe there is a massive silver lining to this, and I'll get into why. Many of you might know I grew up in Leicester actually, live in the south of England now, but grew up in Leicester. And it is quite distinct, the difference between the Shire, which is very English and white, although that is changing, and Leicester, the main conurbation, it was Hindu-Indian when I was growing up, but very Hindu-Indian and Muslim now, big Caribbean community there as well. But I think broadly speaking here, that distinction is seen across England in all sorts of towns and cities. Leicester is an extreme example, but many cities and towns have followed suit now. And another thing which is seen across England that we have to be aware of, I've said this from the beginning of the channel, you have to understand progressivism constantly thinks it wants to make more progress. Now, it's not really progress it's making, it's regress, but it's always in the mindset that something else needs to be challenged, And this is why it's so destructive. Whether we're in the woke era or not, that's a debate that is ending. Progressivism will still march on regardless. Maybe some of the excesses of woke have calmed down, but they're still going to push the mass immigration, multicultural stuff because it's central to the liberal project. Someone made a very interesting point on the Substack yesterday that, they work in media and they've seen behind the scenes woke hasn't calmed down there at all. I think that's right, though. Universities, media, church, it's woke as ever. It's mainly the corporate sphere which is getting less woke, and arguably governments as well, because they know it's not popular with the public, but we're still being hammered by it, by the cultural industries. And as I said many times, our spiritual tradition has been dominated by liberalism. It's probably the biggest tragedy of all. Anyway, the point that I'm making here is that nobody can really stand up to this progressivism still. There is a massive kickback coming, and it's cropping up all over the place, but every institution of state, the whole of the cultural apparatus is going to push for this. So although this is a report from the University of Leicester, it's talking to a trend which has been going on for a while, and that is the takeover of the Shire. And I'm using the language of the Shire purposefully. The links to the Lord of the Rings are obvious. The Shire is idealised England. It's the home of the hobbits, which is seen as sort of country bumpkin English people, and so on. Some people argue the world of men is England as well, but let's not get into that now. The point that I'm making here is the Shire is holy to us as English people, to us as British people as well. I think the Welsh and the Scots, you could argue, have their own understanding of it, but still, it's a holy, sacred element of who we are. So you've got to be very careful when you're going for the Shire, to my mind. But as I say, this is why this might be actually quite a big silver lining. Because let's be honest, at this point, I would say, we've just been hammered with this. We've been embarrassed, humiliated, debased, deracinated in 500 different ways now. So this recent report is nothing new. We've got the armour to deal with this because it's pretty standard. But the point I'm making is, why I think there's a big silver lining here is because it's forcing the middle class to face the reality. And this is vital because the middle class, largely speaking, have been able to really fall into the lovely liberal dream. It's the ugly working classes that vote for reform and, are pushing this right-wing message of homeland, the disgusting poor people. And in reality, of course, we're just hiding, in my view. I'm from the middle class and I've seen it for years. I think they're hiding, they're running away. I think this is one reason why it kicked off in Epping, because the people in Epping were from East London and left because of the diversity, and now it's following them. It's saying you won't get away. You're going to have it now by law. And that's why they're standing up to it. But that's what's coming from the middle class now. And I experienced it in Leicester. I really grew up on the edge of the city and the Shire, so I saw both worlds. And on the Shire side, nobody really minds about diversity if it's sort of like 90%. You can go into Leicester to do your work at the universities where it's much more diverse and it's all wonderful, but then you retreat, if you like, to England at the end of the day. And there might be a few Indians milling about, but they're no trouble. They get on with everyone. They blend in relatively well. But of course now, as the tentacles of diversity reach further and further into the Shire, you're not going to have that luxury. you're going to get what the working class people have had for a long time. And that brings up the really core moral issue of the age. I agree. I don't want to be nasty to anybody. I'm not pro any of that. But the point is that racism, to my mind, has been used for a long time in order to segue in really an undercutting of England and English culture. They've used that as a proviso. Say, well, you don't want to be racist, do you? You don't want to be nasty. And like I said in a recent video, most people think, well, yeah, I don't want to hate someone because they have a different colour skin tone. Who wants to do that? It's just irrational. But then they segue in all of these different definitions of racism in this massive globalist liberal project under that proviso, and very few people see it coming. And then it undercuts you without you seeing. Well, we're going to have to address that now. Because the real question is going to be, do you want to have that, where we're constantly inclusive, doing everything we can, which undercuts our own homeland? That's what it's got to now, and we're going to have to pick a side one way or the other. It's not evil to say, I don't want to hate anybody, but I want to keep England, England. I believe it's sacred. This is my homeland. Stop it. You've gone far enough. Now, I know we've tried that for many years, but many in the middle class have still got their head in the sand. That's the reality. And this is my point. This is the absolutely vital thing about all this that we have to understand. The working class, for all its faults, has had to bear the brunt of diversity in a way that no one else has. And they've been treated appallingly because of it. The working class has been systematically and routinely betrayed by this nation, by the middle class, by the upper middle class, by the government, by the cultural apparatus. And of course, it goes without saying, I dare say many people who watch this channel, maybe you're from the middle class like me, and you have spotted it, and you do think it's wrong. So when I say the middle class, I don't mean everybody. I mean broadly speaking. The working class have been betrayed in this country, and they've been undercut by mass immigration like no one else, starting with their jobs. I saw this when I was in London dating a girl, and she was just filing through all of the plumbers to find the cheapest that she could. It ends up being some dude from God knows where, in Eastern Europe or India or wherever, who'll charge a pittance. And poor old Dave, the builder and the plumber, he doesn't get any work anymore. 20 years ago, he could do that job and have a holiday and have 3 kids and support his family. Not anymore. He's been priced out. And the way that we didn't even consider our own working class families was appalling, I think. That's one of the real downsides of Thatcherism and Blairism especially as well, because of course that's all about diversity on the other side. So my point is, we undercut them economically, Then we had the social breakdown, and with it the religious breakdown, which shifted everything to materialism. We all know that the working class at one time, agree with the socialism on the economic side or not, they had good values. As I've said many times, you can look at the debates between the Thatcherites and the socialists in the 80s, and all right, they fought like cat and dog, but they both loved the country in their own way. They both loved Britain. They both tended to believe in the good, solid values of Britain, of our people going back that were related to the church, family, community. These sorts of strong patriotic values, they've gone, and we've left them at the whim of globalism and its totality. Of course, with that, the welfare state got totally abused. It's supposed to be there to support those who are out of work and help them get back on their feet. But it's basically become a way to subsidise motherhood. And we've seen this now. We've all seen it when you're walking through Asda and you see the working class mum with 5, 6 kids, all different colours. And you're thinking, well, hang on a minute. Where's dad? God knows where dad is, But she's got, you can guess by the colour of the kids, at least 3 different fathers of the 5, and probably another one on the way. Well, she's just being basically supported by the state. The state is the father now. What does that do to communities? It eradicates them. It eradicates the divine role of men to lead the family and hold the community together. And again, that's because we've had a total lack of elders, that masculine authority that can be tough at times but takes us through the storm. We sometimes don't understand why the great wise father has to do what he does, but we trust him. And when we trust him, he leads us to a better tomorrow. Well, that's gone. He's a toxic male now. It's like Fred Dibner. I've spoken about Fred Dibner before. We all love Fred Dibner, classic northern working man. The sort of man who built England, absolutely admirable. Without him, we wouldn't have got very far. It's not that those genetics just disappeared, is it? It's not that some will just, got switched with people. Well, in a way, we did get switched with people from other parts of the world. But I mean the English people themselves. It's not like, we had this mass change and we all went to, Germany. and we got some people from God knows where. The point is, the Fred Dibner genes are still there. But if Fred Dibner was around today, God knows what he'd be like. He'd be called, Freddie D-Dubs, and rap to happy hardcore as a career, He'd have an Asbo, if Asbos are still around. And there is an element of this. Yeah, there's the cultural side where we've been completely sold out with a lack of trad values. But personally, I think Thatcherism is to blame as well. The complete domination of the market. Cheapest price always wins. It's undercut the standard that we once gave the working class men. They've been defenceless against the global market, in my mind. I know it's controversial for some people, but it's what I believe. And of course, it goes without saying the working class is about to deal with the absolute worst effects of multiculturalism and diversity. And as I say, I'm from the middle class. Grew up on the edge of the mass diversity in Leicester and went to work in London. And I've seen the good side, quote unquote, of diversity. I know what it's like when you're working in some trendy London office and there is a pretty girl from Brazil who's making eyes at you. And you got a friend who's from Nigeria and another couple of lads, I don't know, from wherever in the world. And you all have a laugh and it's nice. You're thinking, something might happen on Friday night with that Brazilian chick. I get it. And you're thinking, why would people hate this? Like, what's wrong with them? You must be so hateful. But what I am experiencing, and what so many of the middle classes experience, is a very rose-tinted view of what diversity really is. In many ways, they're getting sort of elite diversity. We have these very intelligent, pretty people from all around the world. That's not what it's like for the working classes. For them, they don't have that experience. And what makes it even worse is the Labour Party was supposed to protect them. It's the Labour Party that was supposed to defend their interests. Well, of course, they're just trying to play to the trendy London middle classes now, talking about the wonders of diversity. So again, they've been betrayed in terms of their political representation as well. Now, again, I think we have to remember a lot of these working class communities, and I saw it happen in Leicester, were just swamped with whole villages from somewhere in Pakistan. That did happen. That doesn't happen to the middle classes. Imagine what that's like. Your hometown, where you grew up, where your friends are, and then all of a sudden, all the shops change. You're like, well, where are my people gone? Oh, and you're called a racist if you don't like it. And told to shut up because you're stupid and bigoted. You can see why they're wound up. And of course, it goes without saying, they bore the brunt of the grooming gangs, didn't they? I mean, everyone thought they were lying for years. And it was their kids that were getting raped en masse. And it was denied by the very party that's supposed to represent them. That's only just acknowledged it. Keir Starmer only acknowledged the cover-up in 2025. 25 years, probably longer, after it started. And I understand the working class don't help themselves a lot of the time. I often think their heart is in the right place. Their instincts are correct. They have that tie to the country. So it's instinctive a lot of the time. But they're not very good at articulating their views very often. It can get, veer into violence every now and again. I'm not pro any of that. But the point is, this is where this Islamic ray guns, thing came from. For those who don't know what it is, it was some EDL march, I think, years ago. And this guy, who'd clearly been on the beers all afternoon, and probably more than just alcohol, was off his head and being interviewed by some leftist channel. They were looking for the gotcha. And this guy said, we've got to stop Islamic ray guns, like that. And obviously it's a stupid thing to say, but he's blitzed off out of his mind. And he's trying to say we need to stop Islamic rape gangs. But of course, this clip went viral. All the liberal media hammered it. This is the stupid, evil, ugly working class. Look at them. They don't even know what they're talking about. But they did know what they were talking about. And they were right that there were grooming gangs. And we laughed at them. And again, when I say we, I know you didn't necessarily. But when I say we, I mean the collective culture laughed at them. And it was wrong. And the point is that we've hidden from the harsh realities here for decades now. And I can see, again, why these protests are occurring up and down the country, and the liberal middle classes still don't get it. Oh, it's just misinformation online. That's all it is. No, it's decades of betrayal. They don't have anything left to lose anymore. And like I say, I'm not pro the riots, not promoting these things, violence or anything like that. But I understand why it's happening. You've caged a dog and prodded it with a stick. You've humiliated it. You've starved it. And then you're surprised when things kick off. It's not a surprise. But again, we have to believe the liberal bullshit. Oh, it's all disinformation online. If all they had was just more liberal propaganda, they'd all love diversity. They'd be happy clappy, and we wouldn't have any problems. It's utter horseshit. And if you can't see through it, God help you. But anyway, the point I'm making is the middle class have hidden from all of this, broadly speaking. As I say, I'm sure many of you are from the middle class as well, and I'm sure many of you have been aware of it. A large chunk of the middle class have, but they've been silenced too, And you kind of have to be silenced. You'll lose your job if you speak up about this. I think it's changing a bit now, but 10 years ago, 5 years ago, you would. But the point is that now the middle class have got nowhere left to run. If they come for the Shire, that's it, But, as I say, I think they're playing with forces they don't understand. Because first of all, we have this big issue of the age, We all understand nobody wants to be nasty to anybody. I'm sure there are instances of this happening. Nobody really supports that. But there is a question here with, well, what's the balance though? We try and be so inclusive all the time and eradicate racism to such an extent you never hear a bad word while promoting our own cultural and even ethnic replacement. Because that's what it's got to now. If they come for the Shire, there's nowhere left to run, and people will react. Because they've said from the very beginning, we don't want this. We don't want the mass immigration. Just like I said in Leicester, if it's 5 to 10% and they're not bothering anybody, then all right, you can get away with it. Yeah, fine. It's like John Barnes in the England football team. Yeah, okay, yeah, he's black, whatever. No one cares. But when you start saying, the whole of your country is going to change and you have no enclaves anymore to retreat to, then it's a really dangerous situation you're opening up here. And like I say, I believe a great moral shift is starting to happen in England, in Britain, in Europe, in the Western world that is seismic. And if they start going for the Shire, it's going to expedite that realisation. I believe that moral shift is epochal. That's the end of Blairism. It's going to be the great challenge to globalism. It's going to be huge, seismic in the history of Europe and certainly of English history. Just like we had many shifts, the House of Tudor, the shift into the Industrial Revolution, Victorian times, the World War era, the post-World War, liberal era, Blairism. Well, here comes the next one. And it's all dependent upon this moral shift away from all it means to be British or European is to be inclusive and welcoming, which is nonsense anyway, it's just ideological, to we are actually a people and we don't want to be eradicated. And that's a moral frame. It's a moral frame. It has to be made in the right way. We can't resort to the ugly language. We can't resort to the, if you like, deracinated views. When I say deracinated, I mean it's philosophically deracinated from our own tradition. We have to be able to speak about it spiritually, philosophically, politically, in a deep and comprehensive manner, in a deeply moral manner. And you'll see there'll be an awakening. You think, hang on a minute, there's nothing wrong with this at all. And there's not anything wrong with it at all. Every people around the world wishes to have their homeland, and to maintain their historic sacred culture. That's completely normal. And again, it's not about saying I want to be nasty and cruel to other people. It's about saying, all right, look, I accept I don't want to be nasty to you, but don't push us into a corner where we have to be eradicated, because that's where it's going. And you might say, oh, you're being over the top. Well, look at the trends. Look at the trends. I mean, the British are supposed to be a minority by 2050. That is not minor. That's huge. The globalist liberal project is going on apace. We're not breeding, and this is happening across the Western world. If we lose our homeland, we have nowhere else to go. And if the great multicultural, lovely, happy, clappy, kumbaya project doesn't work, we're screwed. We're screwed. And other people aren't. The Indians have got India. The Chinese have got China. The Africans have got Africa. We don't have anywhere else to go. And I don't want to have battles. I don't want to have a skirmish. I'd rather have things nice and peaceful and we can be steady. But it's not us that are creating this fractious energy. It's the mainstream by forcing this on the people again and again and again and again, and we don't want it. Limit migration, shut up, you're evil and racist. We're going to have more mass immigration. Just year after year, we've had this now. So what are people supposed to do? And as I'm saying here, if they come for the Shire, they're playing a very risky game. They weren't given a license for any of this in the first place, and they've still done it. And the people have still put up with it and left the working class basically to the dogs and retreated to the Shire. broadly speaking. I know some people say, oh, I live in London and it's so wonderful and diverse. Yeah, but you're from the home counties, aren't you? Or you live in an upper middle class part of Islington. Or you're working in London like I did in your 20s and your 30s, and then you're going to get out. So it's all wonderful to have the diversity then, but then you retreat to England when it all gets too much. Well, what if England's gone? That's the point. And then the middle classes who've had their head in the sand have to address what's going on. And I would say to the globalist liberal overlords, be careful. Because if you push people, you'll create an awakening that you won't be able to control. And it's not because they're hateful and evil, it's because they've recognised who they really are. And you've pushed them to the limit of recognising the truth of life. Which isn't this lovely, happy, clappy, liberal ideology. That's just a front for money power. The reality is people are rooted in homeland, tradition, blood, spirit. You look throughout time, this is what drives people. It's what sent men into the trenches of the world wars. They weren't going there for lovely, happy, clappy ideals. They were going there because they loved their country and they would link arms with their brothers and fight. And we all look back at that now and we think it was wrong because we were fighting our brothers. You know, we look at the world wars. Why are we doing this? Why are we ripping each other apart? And we look at our countries now, and many people are at the point where we think we're being eradicated, you know? And am I using too big language? I don't think I am. I mean, I'd love to be proved wrong. I'd love to be, someone say like, no, it's all going to be fine. But every time I think that, you think they just heighten the mass immigration more, call you evil and racist more. And like I'm saying, I'm not against other people from different parts of the world. My spiritual beliefs is I'd like to shake hands with them and be friends and see where we can harmonise. But I think we all need to have our own geographic centres, where we have our own cultural supremacy, where our own people can feel at home. And of course there can be cultural and economic crossover. Of course there can be low levels of immigration that don't affect the mainstream. But when you do this globalist liberal project and you have this brainwashing that comes with it about, all this stuff about homeland and spirit, it's all nonsense. All you need to be is a happy, clappy liberal who believes in the ideology. While you spend your life working for some rich boss, adding another naught to his bank account, or you see your hometown disappears. That's not moral. Nobody's going to like that. And as I say, the middle classes are going to have to face this now. So anyway, the point I'm getting to here is at the root of this, they are at risk of unleashing forces that they just don't understand. And those forces, they will awaken something in men that will smash apart ideology, because ideology is not deep enough to deal with these forces. A Western man will get awakened from his comatosing haze of liberal modernity, and that's why I think in some senses it's obviously horrible when they try and take the Shire, but they will be awakening something they won't be able to control. And like I think people have said for decade after decade, back away, go easy, slow down, think about this with wise head on your shoulders, but they don't. You're stupid, you're evil, you're racist, let the global market come in and do what you're told. That's what they say. Now, they don't use that language, but that's effectively what it is. And then, of course, they blame everyone else when the issues occur. But like I say, we're hurtling towards an epochal realisation. People speak about civil war and all that. I think that's not quite accurate because there are so many things going on in the country simultaneously. There's so many things, and the state has such control. It's bigger than the nation anyway. So even if you had a civil war, it wouldn't make much of a difference because it's bigger than the nation. It's an awakening that has to happen. And unlike what the mainstream said, that's not an awakening of hate. It's an awakening of love. It's an awakening of structure. It's an awakening of tradition. It's an awakening of the realisation of your sacred homeland. And it's not wrong to wish to hold on to that like any other people in the world would. I mean, look at the left and right, typically speaking. They'll fight tooth and nail over the right of the Israelis and the Palestinians for their homeland. But when it comes to art, no, that's racist. Like I say, it's not about hating other people at all. I wish other people of the world well. I don't seek to have hate in my soul at all. I'm very interested in comparative mythology, learn a great deal from other traditions around the world. I think some of them are superior to ours in many ways, especially in terms of their spiritual depth. But that all said, we do possess a unique civilization and culture here. And people are waking up to that and realising you can't just keep hammering this globalist liberal ideology, and more than ideology, political action on the people, because it will backfire eventually. I hope that we can find our way through this in a peaceful and just manner. I still believe we can, but it seems that the powers that be just refuse to do that. But anyway, look, don't get overexcited yet, is what I'm saying. There's a long way to go. There really is. It's going to be decades in the making, this. My best advice, if I might be so bold as to give it, is to stay calm. Root yourself in your tradition. Learn about your homeland. Learn about its traditions. Learn about community. Don't hate anyone. You don't need to hate anybody. That will backfire. Be wise, be just, be true. Wait for the wise king and the elder. They will come through when they're called. That's a traditional certainty. We should use this time for great awakening, great hope, great passion in our hearts. Not time for complaining and woe is me and our country's being taken over. Getting angry and lost. We're just going to get eaten alive by the mainstream if we do that, and it'll make our situation 10 times worse. It's time for peace, knowledge, stillness, getting ready for a changing epoch. Of course, if you are interested in these things on the personal level, do check out the sister channel, The Sacred Way. You can join the Substack as well. If you want to connect with me exclusively, join the monthly calls and so on. Other than that, do subscribe to this channel if you're new, and enjoy the rest of your day, friends. I know times are tough out there, but there is much to look to in the future. All the best.